Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast this week is Katharine Birbalsingh. Now, Katharine is a head teacher, actually known for being the strictest head teacher in Britain. Katharine's got a very good media profile. You may have seen her in the news recently, actually, among many other talents and activities. Katharine, welcome to the Godcast. How are you? How are you?
Fine, thanks. Thanks for having me.
How's the day going?
Oh, it's going well. Always very busy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. Before I get on to kind of educational questions, I'm quite interested to learn a bit about yourself. I was wondering where in life the decision to become a teacher started, do you think?
When I was at university, I went to Oxford and I went along to one of these McKinsey drinks and thought I could never do this sort of thing. And then I was involved in an organization at the university that sent people like me, state educated, ethnic minority, that kind of thing, into the inner city to talk to children in schools to say, look, you might think that it's for posh white people, but actually I'm there and I'm doing okay. So I did that. And at the beginning, the kids would be saying, oh, it's a bunch of snobs, I don't want to go. And at the end, they'd be saying, oh, well, maybe I'll apply. And I thought, oh, actually, you can make a real difference to people's lives if you go into teaching. So I decided teaching was for me.
Yeah, just share a bit with us, Katharine, a few recollections of your own education, maybe primary school. I mean, I spend as a church, somebody who works in the church, spend a lot of time in particularly primary schools. What were your recollections of primary school as a young child?
Well, I was a bit naughty. I think when I was so I grew up in Canada, so I was in grade one, year one. And I remember my friend and we skived off one afternoon. And the reason was because we were always late coming back in after break. And Mrs. Scheinman said to us, if you're late again, you're in serious trouble. And we were late again. We looked down the corridor and we saw that everybody was sat there, on the carpet, ready to get read of some book. And we thought, oh my goodness, we can't go because we're going to be in loads of trouble. So we ran back outside and we were so silly that we actually went and leaned against the window of the classroom. So of course, Mrs. Scheinman could see us, outside, and she was pointing at us saying, Amy, Katharine, what are you doing? And we looked around and looked through the blinds because there were the blinds. You couldn't really see properly. And we looked through and we realized it was a classroom and we saw her shouting at us. And so we ran off and we ran into the playground and we hid under the slide. There was this big slide you could hide under. And she came out, Mrs. Scheinman came out and was calling our names, where are you? Where are you? And my friend Amy kept saying, we need to go out. We need to go out. And I kept saying, no, let's just stay. We'll just stay. And Amy was saying, come on, where she's caught us. And she hasn't caught us yet. We can stay here. So eventually, obviously, we came out and we were sent to see the principal, Mr. McGilchrist. And Amy was terrified. And Mr. McGilchrist was this big man, and he put his hands on his hips, and he looked down at us. And Amy was cowering behind me, and I can't remember what he said. I don't know what happened. I mean, obviously we got into trouble, and that was that. But there were a couple of times that we were sent to see Mr. McGilchrist. We were obviously a bit naughty. But we were both top of the class. We were top of the class, so we were both naughty and good academically.
Yeah, well, I was slightly different because I was naughty and not very good academically, and I used to hide behind bookcases so I wouldn't be seen and things. But were you ever aware of your naughtiness or maybe the impact that had on other children in the classroom? I don't think I ever really was. I just perhaps couldn't stop myself as a young boy.
I'm not sure we disrupted or anything. That wasn't what we were doing. So there wasn't any impact on anyone else. It was being late or, I remember once with a teacher, being a bit sassy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I must have been very annoying for teachers, I think, probably then. I got quite serious when I was older. So, outside of primary school, I
Mhm.
was, and I always worked hard actually, but
Yeah,
I wasn't naughty later on at secondary school and so on. There I was a good kid.
that's good to hear. And when you became a teacher, how soon into your career, Catherine, did you feel that you had the potential to go and lead a school? Was it quite quick? Were you a leader by almost natural instinct, or was it something that evolved over a period of time?
Um, yeah, I always wanted to be a superhead. So I wanted to go into a failing school and turn it around. That was always my plan but right at the beginning, I thought that was what I wanted to do. I say right at the beginning, after I'd been teaching for maybe a few months or something, I thought that would be a fun thing to do. Um, so I'd always wanted to be ahead, but I also knew that life was long, so I wasn't in any big rush. I wanted to enjoy the journey. So I was a head of department for some years. I was an assistant head. I was a deputy head. I liked all of that. Um, I love schools. I love kids. I love I love the job really, and I love my job now, being headmistress.
Yeah. Something I wanted to ask you. I noticed that you worked for quite a long period in Streatham, and although I've got a Lancashire accent and I've spent most of my life in Burnley in the north, I was actually born in Tooting,
Oh,
and I wonder how you feel or think my life might have been different growing up in London as opposed to growing up into a provincial town in East Lancashire, or do you think there isn't much difference? Perhaps where I'm going with this is this idea of leveling up and the north-south divide. And because I've never been into school in the south, I was wondering if you feel there are more differences between the two.
well, I think that it's wrong to think of the schools in the north and then the schools in the south. I think there are different schools in every place. So there are some really great schools in the south, and there's some really great schools in the north, and there are also some poor schools in both places. Um, I think you could have gone to a terrible school in Tooting or around there and had an awful time, or you could have gone to a good school. Same thing up north. Um, it, it depends on the head. The head and the senior team are so important to a school, and sometimes a school can be terrible one year and then 5 years later be excellent, depending on the senior team that's come in and whether they're turning the school around. I think that being in a big city like London, so that's school, but then there's just the big city effect. um you know, Depending on what kind of child you would have been and so on, there are real problems with gangs and all that kind of thing in London. But I suspect there is less apathy, that if you're in a town where there isn't much work and so on up north, that people may not be so in the good school or the bad school, whichever one it is. It doesn't matter if, for this point that I'm making, uh, in London, there's always a sense of, well, there's work to get onto. You're moving on to a job, and you're surrounded by people in your community who are working. Depending on the town up north, that might be less so.
Yeah,
Uh, and that can have an effect, obviously, on children if you are surrounded by a number of people who are unemployed. Of course, there are unemployed in London as well, but there'll always be people around who are also working. So, and obviously, I don't know what your town was like, and I don't know what your school was like, so it's hard to say.
yeah. Well, Burnley has fallen into one of the categories of one of the most deprived towns
Right,
in the country. And I'm just interested to know what you think about this. So Burnley had all their high schools were knocked down and rebuilt, and
right,
we're very much in an urban setting. The high school was built, brand new state of the art high school was built in the urban estate, um, surrounded by council properties, surrounded by all the issues that you will be aware of: addiction, alcohol abuse, domestic violence, all those things. The school, when it was built, was fabulous. It is fabulous, but over a period of years, the standards, the results declined, fell into special measures. and eventually it was closed and it was mothballed.
Right.
I find that a huge sadness, actually, you know, because actually I think it says an awful lot to the people living in that estate. It says something about perhaps society, how we just let this beautiful school go. What would you have done, Katharine, in that situation if you were in this area? I don't know if that's happened near to you or not, but interested to know what your thoughts are.
Well, schools fail for all sorts of reasons, but for similar reasons. There's no, so first you need staffing, and that can be hard. In a place like Burnley, it'll be hard to find staff. So you need to get over that hurdle and be able to get staff into the building. But then the adults need to be in authority. And if you're not in authority, you'll end up closing eventually. That's what will end up happening. Because what happens is that slowly it erodes over time. So the behavior erodes, the quality of the teaching isn't very good. The teachers feel like they're fighting every day just to get the kids to sit down. It's a nightmare. So then the teachers leave. You can't replace them. The kids are spinning further and further out of control. So there is the issue around, well, are they coming from an environment where there are lots of unemployed people and so on? So how motivated will they be? That's true. But if you run a very tight ship and have high standards for the children with the staff and everybody's working together, you'd be amazed at what can be achieved. But often that isn't necessarily the case because, you know, when people call me the strictest headmistress, they're not being nice. They're being horrible. They're insulting me. They're saying, oh, she hates kids. She's strict. And so when teachers and head teachers feel uncomfortable in being strict, they're not going to do it. And eventually the school closes down. Now that sounds like I'm being silly. How can I make such a jump? But it erodes over time. If the children take over the school, the teachers will leave the school. And then the place is so bad that you have to close it down. That is what ends up happening. Yeah. And that's what people don't understand. You need to have high standards in order to provide children with an excellent education.
I suppose I'm going to ask a question. What parents might say is like, you know, I think when you think of super schools and high performing schools, that they're perfect, but surely, Katharine, you have issues there like everybody else does. You know, petulance, maybe antisocial behaviour, or if you don't, what are the rules? What is the strictness? I don't like the word strictness, but what are the ground rules for the kids that when they come in, they know what they're going to get? What are the specifics?
Yeah. So the thing is that what school leaders need to know is that they can change the behavior of their kids, whatever the kids' backgrounds, whatever the families are like, and so on. And I know that you can have some difficult families who are not supportive. You can change their behavior. Children go to school to learn. They all do. Okay, all of them. But they will push back because that's what children do. But if they feel that you are pushing back when they push back, then they'll stop pushing back, or at least they won't push back as much. So we've got kids in detention every single day, but they're for small things. So they turned around in the lesson. They were fiddling loads with their pens. They were daydreaming for ages outside the window. Now, people will hear, your audience will hear that and think, gosh, that's a bit mean, giving a detention for that. Well, they've got a demerit in the first place as a warning. Second demerit means a detention. That is consistently given out throughout all of the classrooms in all of their lessons. So they know what they're doing. So they need to pay attention or they're going to end up in detention. Now, when you make it so that the tiniest things can get you a detention, the big things just don't happen. So when people say to me, what happens when your kids get into a fight in a lesson? What happens when they start shouting at each other or they insult each other and so on? And I say, well, they don't do that. They say, well, how is that possible? I say, but that's because it's like the expression, you take care of the pennies and the pounds take care of themselves. It's the same idea here. You look after the tiny things. So broken windows theory, Giuliani turned around New York with exactly this theory. When he wanted to fix New York, he rubbed the graffiti off the subway cars. And you might think, well, you've got, murderers, gang members running the city. Why are you taking graffiti off the subway cars? Well, that is how he turned around New York. And it's exactly the same here. You deal with the tiny things. The uniform need ties up to the top, shirts tucked in. They don't get that, they get a demerit, and so on. Now, what it means, for instance, at our school, I often forget to talk about uniform because we never give demerits for uniform, ever, because the uniform is always perfect, always. It is now the culture of the school that no uniform would ever not be perfect. So you can change their behavior. When our kids start here, they're a nightmare. They come in year 7, we have to teach them how to behave in a Michaela way. Yeah. They were in their primary schools with their shirts untucked and their ties all over the place and so on. But they quickly adapt to the Michaela standards and change who they are.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because I was thinking about that as a question, is that, quite often you hear parents say, oh, the GCSE years are critical. But I personally, just from the outside looking in, the transition from year 6 to year 7 is critical as well, isn't it? So you would so will you have rules on haircuts, fake tanning, those kind of things? Is that just a no-no?
Yeah, well, all our kids are ethnic, so fake tanning isn't a thing. But I say all of them, practically all of them. But yeah, they're not allowed any jewelry. They're not allowed any makeup. The haircuts have to be a particular type of haircut. I mean, when I say particular type, we wouldn't allow. We talk about 2 haircuts on one head, where you get it short and then it goes really long and that kind of thing. We're not allowed. They're not allowed to do that. Yeah. And if they have the wrong haircut, they're sent home, and they know it. And we used to struggle with that big time, at the beginning. But now it's very rare that a kid gets into trouble for his haircut, because it's expected, it's known, everybody gets it, and it's just with the done thing.
Yeah. And just on that matter of ethnicity, in Burnley, we're where we are, it's a very white parish that I'm part of. Yes. But it's very multicultural. I think we have 15 different nationalities in our local primary school, and that can be a challenge, can't it, for teachers to bring that together and celebrate that. I suppose there's 2 questions. One is, how do you do that? And secondly, as a head teacher, Katharine, how important is spiritual development for you and your school? Because many of these kids will come from religious families where that is important. How do you celebrate all that in one big, wonderful school community?
Yeah, well, that's where we are very different. We don't celebrate our differences. We celebrate what we have in common. And therefore, we are British. So we sing God Save the Queen, King. We sing Jerusalem, I vow to thee my country. We very much celebrate the fact that we're all British together and that we belong to our country. And that sense of belonging makes an enormous difference to the way in which children buy into the school and buy into what they might do with their lives, that they have something to contribute in their country, and they have a sense of duty towards their community. And these are the kinds of values that we push very much with them. So when you talk about spiritual development, we very much want them to have a moral core. And we talk about their sense of morality and teach them the difference between right and wrong. Teach them the idea of taking personal responsibility and having a duty towards other people, and working hard, being kind. That's our motto: work hard, be kind. And we are narrating this stuff over and over and over again. So I think people, for instance, in terms of advice, that they do things with kids once and then that's it. Whereas in fact, you need to be repeating it constantly if you want if you want kids to buy into what you're about, and people often comment here when they come and visit. Teachers say, gosh, your level of buy-in is so high. And it's true. The level of buy-in is really high. Even the naughty kids, they know what they're getting out of the school and they want to be here.
And I guess I don't want to ask you to give your teachers an appraisal online on a podcast, but I guess that would say that am I right in saying your school retention's pretty good? The not only are the children enjoying the learning, but the teachers are learning. You hear so often, don't you, about disillusion in all professions, whether it's the police force or education or the NHS, is this disillusionment with the job or the vocation that they feel called to. is morale good amongst the team?
Very good. Very good. I mean, a lot of the teachers say things like they couldn't teach anywhere else. They're stuck here, as it were, and teachers who leave, they leave because they're moving out of London, because they've got married and are having kids, or they leave teaching. So our teachers work very hard, but they are a real family. We talk about, like I said, belonging to your school. The teachers here really belong together, and they love working with the kids, and they get a lot out of it because, of course, they have purpose in their lives. They see the impact of what they're doing daily on the children.
It's fascinating to see. I mean, again, I'm not an expert on education, but it almost sounds like a private school model. How is this being received in London and the wider education? Because if this is the magic bullet, Katharine, this should be in every school, shouldn't it? In every town up and down the British Isles. So if it is, why isn't it, would you say?
Because our values are not very fashionable these days. They're small c, conservative, old-fashioned values that you will understand, but I think many people do not.
Why do you think that is? What is that, an erosion of society or erosion of...
Much has changed. One of my teachers pointed out, he's a Christian, he pointed out to me that when Nick Clegg became deputy prime minister, or when he became leader of the Lib Dems, maybe, because that was a little bit before that, maybe 20 years ago or so, he had to explain to everybody why he was an atheist. And this was quite shocking to us, apparently. I don't remember, but and this Christian member of staff of mine was saying, look, 20 years ago, it was shocking if you weren't a Christian. Nowadays, it's shocking if you are. So we've changed enormously as a society. And those Christian values that used to be normal in our society, some of those values have just disappeared. Now, I'm not a Christian, but I suppose because I was brought up in a Christian household and went to church when I was younger, those values are just part and parcel of who I am, and I don't question them. So I run a secular school. I consider myself to be secular. I don't really believe in God necessarily, although I'm not an atheist. I would consider myself to be an agnostic. I do follow those values, and I know all about Jesus Christ and his life and the things he did. And I take for granted the idea that one should love one's neighbor as oneself. I think many of us do, actually, because we've inherited these values from Christianity, and we believe that that's just a normal way of thinking. It's not a normal way of thinking. We think like that thanks to Christianity. But of course, because Christianity is slowly disappearing across the country, those values are slowly disappearing as well.
Yes. Just listening to you, Katharine, I know you've said you're an agnostic, but what I hear from you talking just sounds like you're preaching the gospel. You're teaching a Christian value of love and kindness and respect and tolerance, which is wonderful. But people are listening to you, aren't you? Your media profile is, I've interviewed hundreds of people now on the Godcast, but you're everywhere. You're in the papers, you're on the telly, so people are listening, aren't they? And are you passionate about this enough for this to be nationalized, or have you enough on your plate just keeping this local at the school that you're part of?
Oh no, we have tried. We wanted to open a primary school. We were stopped. We wanted to do a secondary school in Stevenage. That didn't work out. We applied to do a whole leadership program to help other schools become like us. That was prevented from happening. Unfortunately, not everybody agrees with what we do or thinks that we should expand the idea elsewhere.
Yeah. And Katharine, just a few things to finish off. It's been lovely talking to you and learning a bit about your school and yourself. What bits do you... Please don't take this the wrong way, you're a head teacher, but what do you miss about the actual daily classroom activity? Or do you still make a point of getting into classrooms and actually teaching? Quite a few head teachers I speak to say, I do love my job, but I do miss the classroom. Do you fall into that category?
Yeah, I miss the kids because I don't see the kids really nowhere near like you do as a teacher. And, it's our role as head teachers to have a bit of distance from the kids, I think, because it makes us a little bit scarier. So, you know, I always say I'm like the Wizard of Oz, and they never know what's going on in my office. And then I come out and I do assembly, and they have to stand for me, and it's all, ooh, it's Miss Birbalsingh, you know. And I go and see the year sevens, and they say, "You're a VIP, Miss," and all this kind of thing. So you've got to have that distance so you can maintain the aura of mystery and so on. But the thing is that I do miss them. You know, when I was a form tutor, you know, when I first started in this boys' school, and they'd call me mum instead of miss, you know, by accident. And you get to pick them up when they fall down, and you talk to them, and they're just lovely. And, you know, all of that. I miss all of that because I don't do so much of that anymore. And I have a different role to play. But then when I get my young staff who are 24, 25, and they sit with me. I think of one of my science teachers recently I was talking to, and she was talking to me about her form and how excited she was about them, her little year sevens. And she was smiling and talking about them in the way that I used to. And I thought, well, I do my job so that she can do hers, you know? It's her turn now. It's her turn to do the things that I used to love to do. And I have a different role. And as much as I love my job, it's true, I do miss the kids. I miss all of that. But it would be wrong of me to have that, because then I wouldn't be able to be the effective head that I am.
Yeah. Katharine, I'm guessing you're heavily oversubscribed, are you, when it comes to year 7 intake? Would that be right?
Well, we are oversubscribed, but interestingly, the way admissions works is that you choose your schools 1 to 6, and you put your application into the council, and you have just as much chance of getting into our school, whether you choose us first or 6th. Now, the council will try and get you your first choice, but often people don't get their first choice. And so I'd say we have a quarter, maybe a third of the kids who come to us who've chosen us first, but most of them have not chosen us first. And
Right.
some of them have chosen us 4th, 5th, 6th, which means, of course, they didn't really want to come here. But what is interesting is that kids will get onto waiting lists. You know, they come here, they start, they get onto waiting lists at other schools. And if 6 weeks, 6 months later, a place comes up at another school, their parents then say, right, you know, let's go, you can go to this other school. The kid will turn around and say, I don't want to go. I'm really happy at Michaela. So, you know, that's always a good sign, I think.
Yeah, I think so, definitely. Katharine, I just want to finish by, you know, you're a highly respected teacher, and you've been decorated for your services to education. You know, I know a lot of teachers over the years, but I also know that some people's morale is very low, and they are struggling to get out of bed in the morning, and they're finding everything a real struggle. Maybe that's COVID related, I don't know. But could you just perhaps finish by offering a word of encouragement, particularly to teachers who, you know, might just be finding it all a bit tough going? You know, and maybe you might just say, "Well, get out." You know, if you know it's too hot in the kitchen, get out. But maybe something.
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say that teaching is the best job in the world, and that, you know, we're all going to be, well, we hope, if we're lucky, we're going to be 85 one day. And when you're 85 and you're on your deathbed, you want to be able to look back and say, I contributed. I did something to make the world a better place. And teaching, well, you're making the world a better place every day because you're changing the lives of kids. And sometimes it can be hard going. It's a lot of work. It can be stressful, emotional. There's no other job more challenging. But the fact is, you get better and better at it every day. And you want to try and invest in yourself and in your own development and own it so that you can get better and better. And just remember that when you're older, you're going to be able to look back and say, I did something. You know, I left my mark. I made the world a better place. You know, the people who are working in the city in some top bank, you know, driving their BMWs and so on, I don't know what they say on their deathbed, but I know I'm going to be able to look back and say I did something worthwhile. And I think all of us can do that as teachers. And I think it's something we should be proud of.
I can't really follow that, Katharine. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. You know, you're a very busy lady. Thanks for coming on the Godcast, and we send our very best wishes and love to you down from Burnley all the way down to London, and say thank you. Thank you, Katharine.
All right. One day I'll come up and visit Burnley.
I'll hold you to that. God bless.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.